Hello everyone, my name is Zenitsu, and I'm doing a Buddyfight deck profile on a Katana World deck that I have been working on for a while. So, I've been working on Blade Beasts, or Japanese Blades. So, Blade Beasts and Japanese Blades, they got a new card from Buddy Lineage, or SBT01A, and it is a new version of Mikazuki. So, right now, Blade Beasts just haven't been able to deal enough damage, and the new Mikazuki solves that problem. So what the new Mikazuki does is, at the start of the battle, if I have 3 or more different Japanese blades in my drop, all Japanese blades, him included, get penetrate and double attack. Then, if I have 5 or more, all Japanese blades will get plus 5,000 power and an extra 2 crit. That is huge. So that turns basically all of my weapons and other monsters on the field into ginormous beaters that can hit hard, hit multiple times, and deal lots of damage potentially. So, that being said, he is going to be the buddy of the deck. Into the main deck, we run 4 of him. We run 4 of the OG Mikazuki in case we can't get to the new Mikazuki. So he's just an okay 2-drop beater that can have 3 crit and double attack and penetrate. So he's just there in case we can't get to the new Mikazuki. He's also a Japanese blade, which counts towards different Japanese blades counts. Then we run 4 of the Blade Beast of 16 Night Crane Princess. She's a pretty good card considering her ability allows us to discard a Japanese blade from our hand and charge and draw. That's just really good. Filtering through our deck, getting Japanese blades into our drop, she just does everything we need her to do. On top of which, if we meet her conditions, by having 3 different Japanese blades in the drop, she gets +1 crit and move, which is extremely important. So, the idea with her is you play her on your first turn. If you're going first, you play her on your first turn, discard a Japanese blade, and then you will charge and draw, so you're getting gauge back and drawing a card, and then continue with the rest of your first turn, and then you could attack with her, deal 2, and then move her out, and then move her into your center to protect her if you have a weapon you want to attack with instead. So she's just a pretty good versatile, more defensive card. Then we run 4 White Dew Blade Beast. This card's a size 0, which is pretty good in case we can't quite get to these. We could play White Dew and have it be on the field with Crane Princess. And what it does is when the card attacks, you choose a Japanese blade item from your drop, so it's item recursion, by paying a life, and then you equip it for its equip cost. And then at the end of the turn, it just destroys itself, so it adds to the drop, the different Japanese blades in the drop. So it's pretty good, and note, at the end of the turn it gets destroyed, not at the end of battle, which is pretty important because with the new Mikazuki, it gets double attack. So that means you could potentially attack once with the new Mikazuki out and you could attack once, equip a sword, attack with the sword twice, stand up White Dew, attack again with White Dew, equip a different sword because it's whenever the card attacks and it's not a once per turn effect. You could attack with the sword, a different sword again, and then you could attack with Mikazuki and deal a lot of damage depending on what swords you grab. So it's just a really good card in this deck. Then we run 2 Blade Beast of Exorcism. He is just a generic, if you have a Japanese blade on your field, gain a gauge. Like, he's just gauge gaining, just a little gauge gainer. If we don't have White Dew, he's a good card to like have in play with Mikazuki because of all the buffs that Mikazuki's going to be giving him. So he's not terrible. He's also counts as a Japanese blade. Most of the cards in this deck count as Japanese blades, just for having the diversity of Japanese blades. So he's pretty good. Then we run 2 of the Impact Mikazuki. We run 2 of him because the deck likes to try to finish, like if they're too defensive and we couldn't quite squeeze enough damage out to win the game, usually Impact Calling, if we have enough gauge, like just playing the impact can help deal more damage. And he's a Japanese blade to count towards different Japanese blades, and he's just not bad by having 3 crit. His attack can't be nullified if he's attacking alone, which he most of the time is. And then he just has penetrate, double attack, soul guard, move, the good stuff. So we run 2 of the impact monster, and that's it for the monsters of the deck. We run 3 of the sword skills. So this is probably one of the best defensive cards in the deck. It allows us to nullify the destruction of a Japanese blade, and then that Japanese blade also gets counterattack. So with the new Mikazuki pumping everything, you'll probably end up having enough strength to counterattack and kill whatever is attacking you. So that, and it keeps the Japanese blade alive. So it's just pretty good. So we run 3 of it. Then we run 2 Voice of the Blade Beast. We only run 2 because we can only have 1 of it on the field at the same time. And it's just a really good card. So this card reduces the gauge cost of all of our Blade Beasts. Note it's Blade Beast, not Japanese Blade. So it reduces all of the gauge cost of our Blade Beasts by 1. So it makes the new Mikazuki cost less on gauge, it makes the Impact Monster less on gauge, makes Crane Princess less on gauge. Just, it really helps with gauge management. On top of that, it also has the ability where you can discard a Japanese blade from your hand, mill yourself the top 3, and put up to 2 Japanese blades that were milled this way back into your hand, which is pretty good. It's like pseudo card draw in a way. And at worst, you're just milling your deck so you can try to add more Japanese blades into the drop for the Japanese blade counts. So it's a really good card. Then we run 2 Ration, Art of Stored Electricity. This is a really good gauge gaining card. It only charges us 2 gauge unless we meet the 5 life, then it charges us 4 gauge, but it is not a once per turn card. So we could potentially ration into ration and get like 4 to 8 gauge. It's actually kind of insane on how much gauge we can get off of this card. I run 2 of it because I run a different gauge gaining card. And yeah, that you could probably flip-flop the amount between them. So I run 2 Blade Beast Formation, Shape of the Elite. This is probably one of the most important cards in the deck right now, and why I think Blade Beasts are actually pretty good. There's a lot of end the attack phase, rest the opponent's cards down. Like, there's a lot of those abilities running around in the meta, and this is an impact that gives us a second attack phase and stands up all of our Japanese blades. Note, it's all Japanese blades, so it's your monsters and weapons. So it's just a really good impact to give us another attack phase. On top of that, we could even chain our impacts, so we could impact call the new Mikazuki, or the impact Mikazuki, attack with it, and then impact again into shape of the elite and get another attack phase with it again. So it's just really good at solving the, like, what's currently the top defensive cards in the meta. Then we run the other gauge gaining card, Clear Serenity. So Clear Serenity is just a generic gain 3 gauge. It can only be used once per turn, so you could probably like flip-flop between the amounts on Clear Serenity and rations. So you could go like 2 rations, 3 serenities, or 3 serenities and 2 rations. I just found 5 gauge gaining cards to be helpful, so that way I can see the diversity of them and try to gain enough gauge to make my big plays to try to kill my opponent as fast as possible. So I just am running 3 of it and 2 rations. Then I'm running 4 Ninja Arts Snake Gaze. It's just a pay 1 life, which helps not pay gauge so we can pay it on other things. But it's pay a life and rest a monster on your opponent's field. It's just a good card. So we're running 4 of that. We run 3 Hiding Onis. Hiding Oni is one of Katana World's best draw cards. Its call cost is a card from a soul, like any card with a soul. Just remove the card from its soul, and then you just charge 1, draw 2. It's just absolutely insanely good. Then we run 3 Banquet of the Unrighteous. This is also a really good card, especially in Blade Beasts. We're not really doing a lot of self-milling, but the self-milling doesn't hurt us. So what it does is we look at the top 3 cards of our deck, put 1 monster among them into our hand, and the rest go into the drop. So what we're really using it for is to try to look for Mikazuki if we don't already have him. If we do have Mikazuki, we're looking for Mikazuki, the impact one, because he is a monster. And the rest go into the drop, which helps fill our grave for the Blade Beast count. So it's just a really good card. That's it for the spells. Now we go on to the weapons. I run 1 5 Heavenly Sword Animaru. This card combos really well with Hiding Oni because it puts cards into its soul, and then it also has a really high crit, which paired with the new Mikazuki can deal lots of damage. So with the new Mikazuki buff, it's a 11-5, which is absolutely insanely strong. And then if there's no cards when it's rested, so after it attacks, if there's no cards in its soul, it's destroyed. That's why we only run 1 of it. We don't really need to see any more than 1 of it. It's there just for the different Japanese blade. It's not a bad card. It combos with Hiding Oni. It's just good. Then we run 1 Great Fiend Sword. So Great Fiend Sword has like absolutely bonkers crit. Pair that with Mikazuki's Penetrate, Double Attack, and +2 crit and plus 5,000 power. Like, this card is just a huge beater of a weapon. So this weapon alone can deal 6 damage with the Mikazuki buff, and then it gets double attack and penetrate on top of that, so it makes it very hard to stop the damage, and it can hit for 12 potentially. Like, left on lone, it can basically solo kill the opponent. Then we run 1 Blue Secret Katana Zetsu. So this is just another high crit weapon. That's also a Japanese blade, and then it has an equip cost of paying a life and not a gauge, which can be very important because sometimes you just don't want to pay gauge on things you don't have enough gauge for, because what you really want to pay gauge for are like the monsters and the impacts. So saving the gauge there is really good. On top of that, when this card attacks, you could put one set spell from your drop zone to your hand. So it helps us get back our Voice of the Blade Beast if it's in the drop for self-milling reasons, if it was destroyed or it was discarded. Like, it just helps get voice back. So it's really good on that front. We run one Water Slash Sword, and this card is really good for discard fodder because we could always put it back into our hand. If it's self-milled, it has that same utility of always getting the ability to be put back into our hand. So it just helps us extend our plays, and it doesn't cost anything to equip, which can be very important because we need to try to save gauge for our big monsters and impacts. So it's just a really good utility tool card, and it's a Japanese blade. It was errated to be a Japanese blade, so it can count towards our Japanese blade count now. Then we run two of the most important sword in the entire deck. I'm almost thinking on bumping it up to 3 and trying to like play around with some numbers around. But like the fact that this card allows you to dual equip is very important because with the new Mikazuki, he says all Japanese blades. So if you have 2 Japanese blades equipped to you, a 2 out, that's 4 attacks times all of the double attacks it gets. So that's 8 attacks on top of all of them having insanely high crit. Like, it's like this card just makes the deck even more dangerous than like it would previously was. So this is just a really good sword. It has a lot of power, so it can attack through, with the new Mikazuki, it can attack through a lot of big defensive creatures, and I'll get extra crit from the new Mikazuki. So it's just a really good card. Lastly, we run 2 famous blade. This is the Thunder Empire Japanese blade. This card is a pretty good card because it helps with our gauge management. So whenever you cast a spell, you could put the top card of your deck into your gauge. This could be on your turn. This also happens on your opponent's turn. So it essentially could be a free blade. It put 2 cards from your gauge into the drop. It could replace itself in gauge cost by its effect. And on top of that, the damage can't be reduced if this card's attacking alone. So it makes it very hard for the opponent to stop its damage. And boosted by the new Mikazuki, it can hit for a lot of damage. So, but we only need to run 2 of it just because we have a whole bunch of other weapons we're running, and we don't want to like have too many of the same type of weapon. So that's it for the main deck. It is solely focused on trying to get the new Mikazuki's ability to just boost the crit and attack as many times as possible. And it's got some really good tools in here to just help with that strategy. I like to give players options on cards that they can play. So some other cards you can possibly play that fit well with the deck would be Art of Body Replacement. It's just to nullify the attack. Most of the time, I don't find myself needing the defensive options as much because I'm just trying to kill my opponent in 1 or 2 turns. And if I can survive between all of the moves and what currently is in there defensively, I just think more defensive cards don't really help with the deck flow that much. But it's still a good card to consider running. Then you could possibly run Blade Beast of Ghost Slash. This card's a really good card. I just find it to be a little expensive on the gauge when the deck's already super heavy on gauge usage as is. But basically what he does is he allows you to search for any Japanese blade, monster, or item from your deck and put it into your hand. That's the part you really care about. So he searches for the new Mikazuki. He could search for the Mikazuki Impact. He could search for the sword, like the Crane Princess's sword. So it's not like it's a bad card. It's just too heavy on the gauge for me to justify running it. But if you feel like you can squeeze it in and make it work, more power to you. Then you could possibly run Time Sale. A lot of the cards in our deck do hurt us life-wise, so we can get our life total kind of low on our own accord. So Time Sale, just if our life is too low, it just turns into free draw 2. Like, it's a pretty good card. There's some other good cards that are currently in the deck where I just don't necessarily see this card being worthwhile running right now. But if you want to, it's an option. You could put it in. It's not going to hurt. Then you could run Demon Way Keshigure. I actually don't like this card just because it's 1 gauge to draw 1 most of the time. And like the self-milling part doesn't really matter too much because we're not trying to self-mill, and that's what this card really plays its strength off of, is the self-milling. So, but because I'm not trying to self-mill, I'm not really looking at using this card, and instead I just rather have some better draw options or like more consistent card options. You could run Miracle Fighters. Miracle Fighters is basically a spell form of Ghost Slash, which isn't bad. Searches for a size 3 or item, which we have a ton of items, and we have 1 size 3 that you could search for, so it's not a terrible card to run, and it only costs 1 gauge versus Ghost Slash's 2, so it's just another option of a card you could run. Then another card you could possibly run is Hunter Demon's Tome of Judgment. This card's pretty good because its life requirement is a lot easier to meet than Time Sale, and then you discard your hand. Sometimes you don't even have a hand to discard, which means it's just all pluses from there. And then, yeah, it's just discard your hand, draw 3. It's pretty good. I just find it right now with some of the current options I have in here, between Hiding Oni and Banquet, I just don't need it, but it's a good card to think about nonetheless. Then there's Celestial Arts Returning Water. This is basically just a slightly worse version of Hiding Oni. It charges, draws, and you gain a life, whereas Hiding Oni charges and you draw 2. So if you really feel like you're heavy on losing life, like Returning Waters is probably okay to run. It's just drawing the extra card really matters a lot sometimes. But Returning Water is not a bad card. Like, it's a good option if you can't get your hands on Hiding Oni. Lastly, I see people considering or looking at the Adventure Mikazuki. So you'd use him more as a spell than an actual monster to attack with. Basically, all he does is you just put 1 item from your drop zone into your hand. That's it. And then you just play a card either on top of him or play the other Mikazuki and then just sack him to just play it because size restrictions. But getting a item from your drop isn't bad. He's a Japanese blade also, so he counts towards the Japanese blade count. So these are all great options of different cards you could possibly run with the deck to kind of customize it and make it a little bit more flexible. Cards I would consider running in the sideboard are like more of your classic tech tools. So canceling a spell, canceling a call, loyalty, buddy block, and buddy option. So these are just generically good cards to run against like a whole bunch of different decks. And then some cards that were run, but I don't really think about anymore, are the other two Blade Beasts. So Blade Beast of Gluttony, basically all it does is just destroy something on the field if you meet the conditions. But there's so much anti-destruction going on right now that I just don't see this card being worth running. And then Blade Beast of Phantasm, Onimaru. He's okay. Like, he's not terrible, but, like, between his call cost and his size, you're just literally better off running the other like the OG Mikazuki, because the new Mikazuki is just that good. And the fact that they can't exist at the same time kind of sucks, so that's why you just don't need this card anymore. A lot of the swords have redundant abilities or just obsolete that you could run. So, like, the fact that, like, the elite swords half the time kill themselves or just have redundant abilities. So, like, this is just a 2 crit weapon that has penetrate. Well, the new Mikazuki already gives penetrate and +2 crit, and so you're literally just better off running a 2 crit weapon over, like, this card. Same thing with this. Like, it just destroys itself at the end of the turn. It has penetrate already, so it's just redundancy. So that's why you don't necessarily run them. You could possibly run, if you wanted the Tempest Sword, you just don't really need to. Like, it could attack through your center, but you're moving your monsters out of the way to get your weapons to attack anyway, so you just don't really need to run it. And then the other elite sword, like, it just prevents destruction, but half the time you want the destruction anyway to add to the different Japanese blades in your drop. So, like, all of these cards just don't really need to be in the deck anymore, and depending on some of the older builds, like, they run some of them, but I feel like you don't need to run them at all. So I hope you enjoyed my take on the Katana World Blade Beast deck, and I hope to see you guys next time on my next deck profile.